with me, I'm really honored to introduce you to Nicole Wyskoarko.
It's pretty good. Wyskoarko.
Wyskoarko, thank you. I keep getting that wrong, I'm sorry. You are the Executive Vice President for Urban Operations?
Yes.
At Interscope Geffen A&M. So welcome. You've flown a really long way to be here, and we're really happy to have you.
Thank you.
So today we're just going to have a great conversation, and we'll do 35 minutes and some questions and answers after, and let's get right into it. So I'd like to know, first things first, what, when, and how, and at what age did you decide you wanted to be in the music business?
Well, I think it took me a while. Like, I'm sure it probably does for most people that end up on the business side of music. I didn't know growing up that these jobs existed. So I kind of fell into it, and several things kind of came together around the same time. So, you know, the musical interest, we all love music, we're all passionate about music. I grew up playing instruments. I played the piano, violin, and the flute. And my mom, she's born and raised in Cuba. Music's very important to Cubans. I, grew up with salsa music in the house and just a lot of music. But again, didn't know it could be a career for me. So when I was in college, that's when I started to really explore and think about what it was I was going to do with my life. And a few things happened. One, there was a course taught by an entertainment attorney at USC, where I went to undergrad at the University of Southern California. The entertainment attorney, his name is Donald Passman, and he wrote a book about the music business. It's pretty well known. So I read that book and I was just like blown away. So there was that. Then I had a friend that was interning at a record label in marketing, and her boss threw a lot of parties. So I suddenly found myself getting invited to these industry parties and album release parties, and just seeing people that were working on the music side of it. And I'm not ashamed to say that the nightlife aspect definitely had some influence on me, because I find a lot of people that started off throwing parties, DJing, just being out in the scene, and that's how they discovered some of the job options and explore their passion. So there was that aspect. And then the last thing was I got an internship working in publicity for a small boutique film and TV firm. And I loved it. It was great. But what I learned from that was I needed to know everything about that industry. And we started our day reading the trade magazines, which was fun for me in college. However, I would have preferred to have read trade magazines about music. And all those things together at the same time just kind of clicked, like, I need to explore what this is. And I started to connect the people that I was meeting with, the liner notes I would read in CDs, because I was obsessed with, the credits. And I started to realize that these people had these jobs. There was a marketing person credited. There was a business and legal affairs person credited. So at that point, I realized I'm going to continue in this direction and just see what happens, hope for the best, and hopefully it all comes together.
And were your parents supportive of that?
No.
Because
Not at all.
Your dad's a cardiologist, and they all wanted you to go into a formal, respectable job. Sounds very familiar.
Yes. The job options for my family, it was, go into medicine, be a lawyer, go into finance. And they had no understanding of working in music. I wanted to major in music business because that was an option at my school. And, they lost their minds with that. So I lost that fight, which I joke about with my dad now. But yeah, it was a battle. And I think maybe going to law school was part of a compromise, in that I knew it was something that I did have an interest in, but my family would respect. But I knew coming out of it, I had no interest in working in any type of law other than music. And if that didn't come together, I had no interest in practicing law.
We can see why you're a good lawyer. You managed to convince your parents it was a good idea. So you get the second year internship, and the one thing, and we spoke about this when I think we spoke a week or two ago, and the one word that kept coming up is how you made yourself indispensable. And I'd like to understand a little more, for those in the room who wants who want to make themselves indispensable. What does that mean? How did you go about doing it? And especially in such a cutthroat world.
Yes, so it was so hard to get the internship in the first place. I applied to 100 places, and just by luck ended up getting a call. So I knew that was the first layer. So beyond that, I was told, there's no guarantee you're going to get hired. You're probably not going to get hired. So I was like, after all that work, I have to find a way to get locked in with a job. So I knew I had to find a way to be indispensable. And what that was for me was really just kind of creating a job for myself, which I think is really relevant today. There are a lot of positions now because there's so many opportunities in music that are created. I'm constantly hearing about people creating new positions. The position I have at Interscope didn't exist before I got there. So what I looked for was just where there were holes, where we needed help. And the department I was in, one of the issues we had was with rights clearances, particularly on the urban side. So everybody knows that features are really popular in urban music, and we weren't really keeping track of them, and we had so many. So we weren't really keeping track of what artists were being featured, what rights were we granting, from what labels. If at the time, when I was there, Ja Rule was really popular at the label. It was Ja Rule on 50 features. Did that make sense? What were we getting in return from these labels? So I just created a system. It wasn't really anything all that complicated other than, putting a system for keeping the data on track so you could just search. It was just really a searchable database. But no one had thought about it, and no one really had time to do it. So what I found was I created a position that didn't exist, and there wasn't anyone that wanted to do it without me there, because it was also something that no one in the department really wanted to deal with. So I just kind of found where I could fit in, and I found myself getting calls in class, and at the time I had a two-way pager. I'd get a lot of text messages from people at the office, and they just found that they needed me, and had they not kept me on, they would have had to have found someone to do that role anyway. So it was just easier to keep the person that basically created the role.
And do you find you do that often, or is this... So I guess the thing I'm trying to get behind is that indispensable is not just the one-off thing, right? It keeps happening, and you keep having to create that, whether you're a partner in a law firm or whether you're leading an entire team. I'm just curious, do you find that there's something that's just innate to you, or is it something that you have to cultivate?
I think it's something innate to me, but I think it's something important to think about, to always find your niche in whatever you're doing. Maybe it's a festival. But when you do that, you stand out. And I always, I knew I was in a challenging industry as far as finding a position. So I always wanted to find a way to make sure I would stand out, that I would be needed. I could specialize in a particular area, that someone would want to call on me for a particular need.
So at Def Jam, you worked with some amazing, in fact, in your whole career, the list goes on. You've got Kanye West, Justin Bieber, Rick Ross. In private practice, you worked with DJ Mustard. It just goes on and on. Kind of leaving that clear legal path. And of course, one never leaves behind what you've studied or what you've been. You can always go back to it. But was it scary? Is it something that you had to think long and hard about? Was there a tipping point at which you decided that I now need to switch over into something new and explore that creative side?
When I left private practice to go to Interscope, I didn't really look at it as leaving legal practice. I still use a lot of what I was doing before at the label, and I'm always going to be an attorney. I'm always going to pay those fees to keep up my license. So it's something I could always go back to if I want to, and I think it's just an adjunct to what I do. So I never really thought about it as just giving it up. So it wasn't something that I was sad about, or I felt like I was, ending a chapter in my life. I just felt like I was more growing the skills I already had. But I think every attorney secretly wants to not be an attorney also. So it's really exciting to be able to explore more of the creative side. But in private practice, I did feel like I had an opportunity to start exploring the creative side, and that I was selecting the clients I wanted to work with. So I felt like I was an A&R in a sense on the talent finding side, because I would seek out artists that were unsigned. I would spend time with them, and I would decide who I thought, might have a shot, or who I was just really excited about musically, and I wanted to be a part of their story.
That's. I guess the next question I was going to ask is, how hard is it to make that switch? And I have my own opinion. I've switched a couple of times. I think my parents still try and figure out what I do on a daily basis. It's always interesting when you hear your parents try and explain to their friends what it is that you do for a living. But did you find it hard? Is it something that came naturally? Is it something you had to think long and hard about? Or is it just kind of this confluence of all the things you've ever done that just led you down this path and brought you to where you are now?
It was challenging at first. I think it was challenging just because I was so comfortable doing what I had been doing. I was at a record label for 14 years, and as an attorney at the label. So going from that to private practice and then moving into a position where I wasn't looked at as an attorney, and it was more about, how do you feel about how the company is running? How do you feel about this decision creatively? So these were questions that I wasn't necessarily always asked before. And I also just had a routine that I had to step out of. So it was frightening at first. I didn't know how to judge my success for the day. I was used to closing deals, but literally closing them with the paperwork, as opposed to now I'm part of closing the deals in the conversation. So I didn't know if I was doing a good job. I couldn't tally up, I signed this many artists, I got the paperwork done, I closed these deals. I couldn't quantify what I was doing. But I started to get feedback from some of my coworkers, and I think that really helped in just getting comfortable. And I think we all deal with this. It doesn't matter how many years you're doing something. You have moments of insecurity, moments where you question yourself. And even if you felt like you were really good at something and then you switch, you're going to have to go through that process of just not knowing.
Am I doing this right? Yeah.
But it's okay. I feel really good about going through that because I know it makes me more nimble. And I wanted to be comfortable with the discomfort.
A friend of mine always says, you're not a tree, you can leave. And I love that. Don't stick to the same thing. You can
Exactly.
grow and be better at it.
Exactly.
It's really inspiring. So maybe let's start by saying, what do you do now? So there's this role. Someone phones you up and goes, you have a great job, you're a partner in a law firm, but would you like to do this instead? How did you negotiate that deal? How did you get in at such a senior level? How did you convince them you're the right person for the job? Tell me a little more about that journey and where you are now.
So I guess, we can start with when the conversation started. It wasn't my idea. I was approached with this this new opportunity, and I was not only scared. I was scared and excited, but I was scared about telling my clients that I was thinking of moving on. I think that was the scariest part, was how it would impact them. I'd convinced these artists to work with me, so I felt really responsible, and I just wanted to know that they were going to be okay, that they felt like they had someone taking care of them, and I needed to hear that from them. So I spoke with all of my clients, and the response was, "Congratulations, that would be a great thing for you. You work way too hard for me." You should do something for yourself, and we're proud of you.
That's amazing.
So that felt great. I'm so happy that was the response. I had one client that was just like, "Can you keep me?"
If you don't ask, you don't get. Right?
Yeah. I don't know if I thoroughly answered the question.
So actually, when I started my previous business, my lawyer and I just met her as I went to this firm and joined, and we took on Sony and Universal and Gallo and a bunch of others. We took them on together, and when she decided to leave 2 years later, I thought, I can't survive. What am I going to do without her? And that relationship that you have with your clients is so close as an attorney. And I think it's nice that you were able to have your clients support that decision and see where you go. And I think that speaks a lot probably to who you are and how you relate to people. And yeah, respect for that.
And I'm actually still really close to all of my clients, and I still work with them even if they're not signed to the label. I represented an artist named A Boogie, and I helped put together some features for him with one of our artists. Her name is Melly. I'm still close to the artist Her, who just won a Grammy for the Best R&B album. I'm still close with Meek Mill. I still work with DJ Mustard, and I still work with Playboy Cardi. So it's still a close relationship.
And you still get to go to all the parties.
And still get to go to the parties and the shows.
So tell me more about what you do now. What does a head of urban operations do? And maybe perhaps a little bit about how did you bring your legal experience into that, and how do you think it informs what you do now in leading teams? And
So one of the key things I do is manage the A&R team. And when I say manage, I feel kind of odd even saying that, because I'm all of the entire team, they're all friends and family. So it's kind of like, do I really manage them? But I'm there to help them, to help get their projects to where they need them to be, and to help them maneuver through the corporation. So what that means is everything from helping them with figuring out the budgets for their projects, creative decisions, just bouncing ideas off of one another, helping them communicate with the marketing team, the production team, so that we can achieve the deadlines, achieve the goals of the company, but also get what we need from them creatively, so that we can achieve their creative vision for the project. I also work closely with marketing. I work closely with really every department at the label in kind of just a problem-solving capacity. They come to me with all the fires and the emergencies, and I'm here to help solve the problems from a higher level. Because with my background, I can see how everything flows from a bigger scale, from like 2,000 feet above, as opposed to just focusing on the issues that were right in front of me. So on the legal side, I'm still involved with the deal conversations, which is great for me because I love negotiating. Mm-hmm. But it's from a creative angle as well. So I meet with artists early on that we have interest in, and I'm able to look at it from a creative perspective and also from a deal perspective of how does this make sense for the company. And I actually know what we can and cannot do with a project. So we can, from that level, figure out what direction we'd want to go in with an artist if it makes sense for us, as opposed to having to make several calls to other people at the company to say, they want to structure things this way, or it's this type of artist, is this something we can do?
So you're basically the secret bullet they bring in. So I guess the question would be then, why don't any of the other companies have a similar role? And is it just because the chairman was had the foresight to see that this would be something that was needed?
I think they do in a sense, but they're all called something different. It is very GM-like, when you look at the responsibilities. So a company that has a head of urban, that has a GM, or that has a hybrid, like I would say Atlantic Records, I don't know if anyone knows Lanre. She's in kind of a role that feels GM-like on the urban side, but that's not her title. But it's kind of problem solving and coming from an angle of, she came up from the A&R admin side, so that was her main background. So I think it exists in different capacities, and it's kind of catered to what the culture is at the label and what the needs are at the label, but they're all similar. There's a common thread running through.
And so let's talk a little bit about the music itself. What is your prognosis kind of on the state of urban music right now? How's streaming affecting that? I'd love to hear your insight in terms of what you're discussing with these artists that you're signing up.
It's incredibly exciting right now. I think this is an amazing time to be in urban music. much more exciting than when I started, other than the fact that I was, at the start of my career, so everything was exciting to me. But we're able to really monetize urban music on a scale that we never have before, not that I've seen. And we also have the metrics to support it as well. So I think in the past, it felt more niche. And now it feels like it truly is pop music as far as the popularity is concerned, as far as where you see urban, traditionally looked at as urban artists in the charts, whether it's the Hot 100 or top 200 in sales. So it's an exciting time, and it's also exciting with the deals because we're signing so many acts. So I feel like we get to really explore what urban music is, because there's so many more artists we can work with now, because it financially it justifies it. It isn't something that's sitting over here and we can just test it out. It's like, we can sign an artist like we have an artist named Summer Walker that's R&B, but maybe it's left of center. There's another artist named Ari Lennox and Mariba, and it's also kind of like how exactly do you describe that? Or a Juice WRLD that's another artist of ours that's doing really well globally, and people describe him as emo rap. It's like a genre that, absolutely didn't exist before. So I feel like we can really explore creatively, which is exciting. And it's great to see the genre performing so well.
I think it was Poppy that said yesterday, and maybe you can refresh my memory, how many genres did Spotify have? Yeah. 970 genre and mood playlists. I want to know what emo rap is, quite frankly. Do you find that sometimes you have to create these words, or do the artists come to you and tell you that this is what we do, and we just now need to go out there and create this perception that this is actually a genre that existed? No one just realized it was there.
Well, we have artists come in, there was an artist we met with recently that we were looking at signing, and they referenced Juice WRLD. As far as, I don't know if they use the words emo rap, but really their point was, we don't really sit in any genre. This is an artist that can rap, has melodies, can sing, but his influences are all over the place. So we don't want you to approach it as this is just like a traditional rapper. So I think the genres, we don't always come up with them. I don't really like to come up with the titles, because I don't feel like I should dictate what an artist is and what their creative vision is. I want them to tell me. But sometimes the genres come from the press or from the artists themselves, and some people in the industry will come up with labels too. The emo rap label has come from Juice WRLD being a rapper, being melodic, but when you read his interviews or talk to him about his references, he references artists like Green Day and Fall Out Boy as influences. So, when you look at kids coming up as artists, kids that are like 19, 20, it makes sense. Because they were coming up at a time when it was okay in their social groups to listen to every genre of music. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to identify with just one core genre, so their influences are very diverse. And I think it's something that we're going to see more and more as time passes in the industry with music genres, that we're going to have a harder time defining what a genre is, and we're going to have to be open to figuring out how to categorize things, knowing that you can't really categorize them anymore.
So what advice do you give to some of these younger guys coming up? So bear in mind, there are some artists in the audience, there's some people just kind of starting out in business, there are those who are really well established. I guess on two fronts, what advice would you give to artists and to their managers? And also, what advice would you give to people who are looking at making big career shifts? What are some of the challenges that they should consider?
I think for artists and managers, it's also an incredibly exciting time, because the barriers to entry in music are gone. You know, anyone can enter the music business creatively these days. It's just a matter of getting people to listen to your music. But because of social media, because of SoundCloud, because of all these platforms, YouTube, you can really get the attention of fans quite easily. So you should just do what you're doing. No one can really tell you what to do. No one can give you any set of rules. You have to create the rules these days and just get your music out. Get the music out. Find a way to perform. You know, if you're the type of act that performs, hopefully, you know, we always, I love artists that can perform, but get your music out there, because there's no barrier to getting your music out, and that's the best way to move forward.
So one of the questions that came up yesterday on a panel I was on is this idea of getting your music onto playlists, and just the amount of work and time it takes to get there. Do you think there's value in getting your music onto these Spotify playlists or Apple playlists, or is it more just about get out there and perform and build your own fan base?
I mean, the first level is getting out there, performing, and building your fan base, but the playlisting is very influential. And you know, unfortunately, I missed the panel. I arrived late last night, but it's something that we're going to continue to talk about in the business, how the playlisting impacts things. And it almost feels like playlisting has become the new radio, you know, where you're trying to get those slots. And how do you get those slots? How do you get the playlist editors to pay attention to your music? And if you are a new artist, there is a challenge in that you're fighting with these big behemoth labels that are trying to get their artists played. And
way more clout.
Right. And how do you get on the biggest playlist with the biggest reach? And or is that the strategy? You know, do you focus on the smaller playlists that maybe you have more access to as an independent artist?
And also one of the things we were talking about is just engagement and you know, which playlists give you more engagement with actual fans as opposed to just random plays in the background because it's a track I happen to like.
And that's important too, is I think with the playlists, with everything really on social media, is digging deeper into what the engagement is, what the actual influence is from a particular playlist, or if you're talking about an influencer, you know, they're weighted differently. And just getting on a playlist and having someone hear a song and not really engage with it or pay attention to it isn't really meaningful.
Absolutely. So I was told 10 minutes ago that I had 10 minutes, so I'm going to switch track because I have so many more questions. I'm going to touch on one that might be a little more thorny, and that is, do you find being a woman in business has been an advantage or a disadvantage? And how have you dealt with that, especially in such a male-dominated industry?
I think it's something that, and it might just be my personality, that I've turned into an advantage, but it's not necessarily that it's an advantage, you know, in the music business. It can be very challenging being a woman in the music business. I think the Me Too movement has been very helpful and has caused a change that was much needed. Which is great to see. I feel much better today about if I were to have a daughter and she wanted to work in music, I'd feel better about it now than I would have when I started. But I feel like for me personally, it's just forced me to speak up, stand out. You know, I've had to maybe fight harder than some of my male counterparts. And that's fine. It's made me stronger. I don't feel like that's something that, you know, you should necessarily have to do, but it's just what I went through. I feel like it's made me stronger, but it's also made me want to fight for more positions for women. You know, so like I recently hired a female A&R at our company that I'm really excited about. But it's something I've pushed for throughout my career. Even when I was in a business affairs department, I started off as the only woman. By the time I left the department, we outnumbered the men in the department. So I think that's been my approach is, you know, if there's more equality, then we'll have more of a voice and, you know, you won't have to yell to be heard.
That, and I think also we spoke about this a little over lunch, but being brave enough to come up and have these kinds of conversations. You may not think that what you've done is that exceptional because it's just what you did and it's who you are and it's how hard you work. And I think sometimes it's having more role models out there like yourself to show others that, oh, I look like her and I can be her, and there's someone to live up to. And I think that it's important that growing up, I didn't have enough female role models, and I think more and more that's in this industry and many others what young girls need. And I think it starts at home, but I also think it starts within the workplace and mentoring. And yeah,
such a good point. Thank you. Such a good point. We have to share our stories, and we have to be seen, like you said, so that other women coming up know we exist, and also to have someone to ask questions to, and to just be there for support. When you speak up at events like this, when people know you exist, they know that there's someone that maybe they can email or call or get a meeting with, and they can ask you, how did you deal with certain issues?
So I want to give other people a chance to ask questions, but I do have a few rapid fire questions for you. Okay. What is one ungoogleable fact about you?
Googleable. I guess I was mentioned this earlier. I think I'm with my last name. We're talking about the fact that I think my family changed the name when they immigrated to the States. I'm certain I know every single person with my last name. And I did a 23andMe recently, and I didn't have anyone pop up that was a surprise.
That's pretty cool. Can you name a book that's positively changed your life?
I love The Alchemist.
That's a great book.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's popular for a reason. I think it's just really inspiring, and focusing on your journey is just such an important thing in life. I think it was just a beautiful way of telling something that we all kind of know, but it was just told in such a beautiful way.
It's one of those books I read many years ago, and I keep thinking I should reread it just because it was so impactful. What was one of the best pieces of advice you ever received?
It's probably more than one. One thing was to always return phone calls, which I didn't really think was such a big deal at first, probably because I earlier in my career, I don't think I was getting that many phone calls. It was hard to keep up. But now, I make it a point to try to go through and return every phone call the same day, just because people get upset, and our business is about relationships, and it's so easy to move on to the next, and you might miss something really important. Sometimes people are calling you to give you a pointer, help, a useful piece of information. So. Sure.
So I know you're not allowed to pick favorites, but if you had to pick a band or an artist right now, who would it be?
I mean, all time, I love Prince. Just all time. Like, since I was a kid, since I saw the Purple Rain I thought the best movie when I was growing up ever made. And I got to see Prince perform live a few times, which was amazing. It changed my outlook on live performance, because you could hear things that you couldn't hear listening to a cassette or MP3. And currently, I mean, we have so many great artists that I love. I love Sampha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right either. He's not one of ours, but just love him.
Okay, I will ask only one more, and then we'll hand over. If you could choose a superpower, what would it be?
I would love to stop time temporarily. Like, I always think about this. If I could just going through my day, sometimes your days are so crazy, I just want to be able to stop time like this. Like, I would literally do that, and everyone else would stop, but I would not, and I could just get things done.
When you figure that out, could you share it, please?
And then I would go like this, and then everyone would start moving again after I took care of what I needed to get done for the day.
But would you rearrange their clothing?
I would, and I would probably move furniture around too, just to mess with people's heads.
I like you. Are there any questions in the audience? so many more. We might have to continue this later.
Hi. I'd just be interested to know your thoughts on how much artist development, whether that still exists at a major label, and how much when you're signing a new artist, are artists now expected to have a fan base and have a release maybe and have played a certain amount of gigs as compared to maybe 10 years ago?
I think that's a great question because there's a feeling today that artist development has gone out the window, which I don't think is true, but I think it's definitely evolved over the years. At a major, at least at ours, it's really important to us to sign artists that we believe in, that we are passionate about. And that's in part because it just takes up so much bandwidth to get an artist going and to get the project out the door. So it has to be a combination of, where they're at in their cycle for it to make sense to be with a major. But it can't just be about data and a following and things like that, because they might have that and you might not be passionate about them. You might not really connect with them and believe in them. So we have artists that have been signed to the label for many years that are being developed, but I still believe that the development might be on a different scale than an independent, for example. But you could think of like a Billie Eilish.
I just discovered her. She's amazing.
She's phenomenal. She's been signed since she was about 14, and she's 16 now, and she's putting her first album out next month. She did put out some singles and an EP prior, but this has been a development process over the past 2 years. Everything has been part of the development, and we have artists like that we know are going to take time, but it's worth the time. And then we have artists that sometimes move really quickly. Like when we signed Juice WRLD in the spring, and we put a project out basically immediately in it, and it's because we knew he was at a point in his career where the music was going, so we just had to make everything else catch up. So I think it's a balance, but I think it's hard for a label to sign an artist that has absolutely nothing going on other than the creative, in the sense that if there isn't a team behind them as well, it does make it a challenge. But there are artists that get signed that are going from, in some regards, from zero, but I think the label also knows that there's a team to help them really accelerate the process.
Chris?
Nicole? Of course, there were no other hands. I'm helping here, honest. What was your best learning curve? You've hopped through different roles at different times. You've moved deliberately between them. Where did you learn most?
I think I learned the first part of my career at the label. I think I learned the most in some regards because it was the beginning, and I was probably most receptive to, being very humble and being told, hey, this sucked, you did a terrible job, and, brushing myself off and, doing better. So I learned a lot early on with that. I also just learned a lot about just how a label operates in the beginning. So that was probably the biggest part. When I went to the firm, I didn't have a whole team behind me. So then that was a whole other learning curve because we had to figure everything out on our own. I couldn't call a trademark department and say, hey, what do you think about this? I was the first line of defense with the artist. So anything that happened, they would call, and they were just calling me directly. They were calling me on my cell phone for every single issue. So I had to learn a lot very quickly, just from doing it kind of from a smaller scale.
One over here.
Yeah, cool, great. I'm just curious about, as now more managers and more artists are creating their own labels. How do you work labels as to be compatible in this new market where more easily to distribute music easily? How do you compete that?
Well, for us, I think our label was built on joint venture partners. Some of our iconic partners were Aftermath, who we still are in partnership with. Aftermath was Dr. Dre's label. Today, we have Aftermath, we have Shady Records, which is Eminem's label. We have LVRN, which they have the artist Black, spelt with a 6. They have Summer Walker. We have Dreamville, which is J. Cole's label. He has several artists signed, including an artist named JID. Then we have Mike Will, who's a well-known producer. We have a venture with him. We have a venture with Benny Blanco. I could probably name more, but I think that just goes to show how important it is to have venture partners and how influential they can be in the business. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Definitely answered me. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh. More ungoogleable facts.
When you were approached with the offer of your amazing job, going from working on the side that you were, did you have any reservations with like going to work for a major label?
I did. So when I left a major before, I felt like I was, leaving the big corporate behemoth, and I was going to run off and into my independence. And this was, the better side of things. I was on the side of like, good instead of evil, and that was my feeling at that moment. So going back to a label, I was like, okay, how does this work? I ran away from a label, in a sense. And I felt like the label I'm at, I feel like they operate very differently, and that was why it was so interesting to me. I don't feel like they operate like a traditional record label. I feel like they operate like a combination of a record label and a tech company. So it still felt very independent, just in the way that they think. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the chairman, John Janik, came from an indie. He started Fueled by Ramen, so he thinks like an indie label. So that's why it was okay for me.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've done exceptionally well for someone who flew very, very far to be here. So it's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.